There are moments in life when God asks you to do something that feels completely opposite to your nature. He asks you not to move, not to fight, not to defend, not even to explain. He simply asks you to be silent. And in that silence, something supernatural begins to unfold. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not defeat. Silence is the language of those who trust their God more than their own voice, more than their own understanding, more than their own strength. You see, silence is a spiritual position. Silence is a confession that says, Lord, I cannot win this battle on my own, but you can. Many times, your greatest shift begins when your mouth stops and your faith begins. God knows when to speak, when to move, when to expose, when to open, and when to shut the mouths of those who stand against you. Your job is not to argue with destiny thieves. Your job is not to negotiate with spiritual attackers. Your job is to stand still and let God be God. When you stay silent, it is not because you have no words. It is because you have too much faith. The world thinks silence means surrender, but heaven sees silence as spiritual authority. Silence is where God steps in. Silence is where God shows himself. Silence is where God says, you have done your part, now watch me do mine. There are people who have misunderstood your silence. They thought you lacked confidence. They thought you had no answer. They thought they won. But what they didn't understand is that your silence was not emptiness. It was preparation. Heaven was moving while you were quiet. God was setting a table for you while you spoke no word. Your silence was not the end. It was the beginning of miraculous intervention. Think of how God works. When the Israelites stood trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army, God didn't ask them to shout. He didn't ask them to fight. He said, "Be still, and you will see the salvation of the Lord." Silence became the gateway to a miracle that no human effort could have ever produced. When Jesus stood before his accusers, he didn't argue. He didn't prove himself. He remained silent because heaven does not debate with darkness. Heaven overthrows it. Heaven does not need permission. Heaven does not need approval. Heaven moves when the obedient stay still. Some of the biggest storms in your life are not asking you to speak. They're asking you to trust. Every time you hold your peace, God holds your battles. Every time you stop fighting in the flesh, God begins fighting in the spirit. And what he can do in a minute is greater than what you could do in a lifetime. There are situations right now where your silence is frustrating you. You want to say something. You want to defend yourself. You want to react. But heaven is whispering, "Not this time, not this battle. Stay silent so I can speak." God is not asking you for silence to punish you. He's asking for silence because he is preparing to speak louder than any voice raised against you. Your silence invites God's miracles. Your silence opens doors you could never open. Your silence softens hearts you could never reach. Your silence confuses enemies you could never defeat on your own. Your silence prepares a breakthrough that your words would have delayed. There is power in silence when that silence is surrendered to God. Silence is not empty. Silence is full of faith. Silence is not weak. Silence is spiritually aggressive. Silence is God's shield placed over your life. And when God speaks after your silence, the whole world will know it was not your voice that saved you, but his mighty hand. Some miracles do not arrive through shouting. They arrive through trusting. Some deliverances do not come by answering your critics. They come by letting God answer them. Some victories do not manifest when you raise your voice. They manifest when you raise your faith. So if you are in a season where God has silenced you, do not fear. Do not think something is wrong. Do not think God has forgotten you. He has placed you in silence because a miracle is being prepared in secret, and soon it will be revealed in power. When God speaks after your silence, he speaks in ways that shake the heavens, silence the enemy, and lift you into a place no one can deny. Stay silent, stay faithful, stay trusting. God is not done. And very soon, the miracle you could not produce with your words will be produced by his voice. When you choose silence before God, you are not choosing weakness, nor passivity, nor retreat. You are choosing a sacred posture, a position of spiritual readiness where the noise of the world can no longer drown out the whispers of heaven. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of God. There are moments in your life when every voice around you feels loud, conflicting, demanding, and pressuring you to respond, to defend yourself, to explain, to fight back, or to prove something. But there is a deeper power that rises when you resist that urge and step into silence before the one who knows all things. It is in this silence that the heart positions itself to receive what the human mind could never produce: divine instruction, heavenly wisdom, supernatural strategies, and miraculous intervention. There are seasons when God will tell you to stay quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because he is preparing to speak on your behalf. Your silence becomes the canvas on which God paints his victory. Your silence becomes the battlefield where God wages war for you. Your silence becomes the stage where miracles step forward and testify. You see, many people confuse silence with defeat. They think if you are not fighting loudly, you are losing. If you are not responding, you must be afraid. If you are not explaining yourself, you must be wrong. But heaven works differently. Silence is not surrender. Silence is strategy. Silence is not the end. Silence is the setup. When you stay silent, God begins to move in ways that your words could never accomplish. Your silence in conflict allows him to become your defender. Your silence in pain allows him to become your healer. Your silence in confusion allows him to become your guide. Your silence in betrayal allows him to become your justice. When you stay silent, you give God permission to do what you cannot do. Words sometimes close doors, but silence often opens them. Words can escalate battles. Silence can end them. Words can limit God's movement, but silence creates space for him to work unhindered, uninterrupted, unchallenged by human interference. There are times when God will purposely quiet your spirit. You will feel the urge to talk, to argue, to express your emotions, to justify your intentions, but something inside you stops you. It's God saying, "Let me handle this." That inner stillness is not natural. It is supernatural. It is a sign that heaven is already working behind the scenes. There are storms where your voice is not the weapon, your silence is. There are attacks where your response is not needed, your stillness is. And there are moments where God will fight for you only when you stop fighting for yourself. Silence also cleans the atmosphere of your heart. Noise clutters your faith. Overthinking weakens your spirit. Explaining yourself to those determined not to understand you wastes energy you need for the next miracle. But silence restores focus. It draws you inward toward God, not outward toward distractions. In silence, you start hearing things you could not hear before. You hear the guidance you missed. You hear the truth behind your situation. You hear the peace that tells you everything is under control. Silence amplifies the voice of the Spirit, the voice that comforts, directs, corrects, and empowers you. When you choose silence, you also separate yourself from unnecessary battles. Not every accusation deserves a reaction. Not every argument deserves engagement. Not every question requires an answer. Many conflicts exist only because people keep feeding them with words. When you remain silent, the fire dies. When you refuse to participate in chaos, chaos loses its power. Silence disrupts the plans of the enemy because he expects you to react. He expects you to break down. He expects you to defend yourself endlessly, emotionally, and exhaustingly. But when you stand still, unmoved, unbothered, and at peace, he becomes confused. Silence is spiritual warfare. Silence is a declaration that God is in control, not the enemy, not the people around you, and not your emotions. Silence also reveals something powerful: trust. When you stay silent, you show that you trust God more than your own ability to fix things. You show that you believe His timing is better than your reaction. You show that you believe His justice is higher than your arguments. There is a moment when faith is no longer expressed through words, but through quiet confidence. That quietness becomes the loudest sermon your spirit can preach. It says, "I know God is about to move. I know God is handling this. I know I do not need to fight every battle. Some battles are won by waiting." And in this silence, God begins to orchestrate miracles. He aligns people, shifts circumstances, removes obstacles, exposes truths, brings clarity, opens doors, softens hearts, and prepares breakthrough. And when the miracle arrives, you realize something profound. You did not fight for it, argue for it, or stress for it. You waited for it. And in that waiting, your silence spoke louder than any words you could have said. When you choose silence, something powerful begins to happen within you. Your spiritual ears begin to open. Most people think hearing God is about speaking more prayers, using more words, making more noise in the heavens. But the truth is, many times God is speaking, and the only reason we don't hear Him is because we never stop long enough to listen. Noise has become the language of our generation. We are surrounded by voices, voices from people, voices from our own thoughts, voices from fear, voices from pressure, voices from the enemy. But rarely do we allow ourselves to sink into that blessed stillness where His whisper becomes clear. Silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is the environment where divine communication becomes loud. Have you noticed that when your mind is restless, everything feels confusing? But the moment you sit quietly, without trying to control anything, what was blurry begins to settle. What was loud within you begins to quiet down. Your spirit begins to rise above your emotions, above your fears, above your worries. In that silence, your thoughts slow down enough for God's thoughts to reach you. People underestimate silence because silence doesn't feel productive. But silence is where the soul becomes aligned with heaven. Silence is where anxiety loses its hold. Silence is where God's direction breaks through the fog of overthinking. The noise of life can drown out the voice of God, even when God is standing right next to you. That's why Scripture often reveals God speaking in a whisper rather than a shout. A whisper requires closeness. A whisper draws you in. A whisper forces you to silence yourself so you can lean toward the one who is speaking. When God whispers, it is not because He is distant, it is because He is near. And He wants you to quiet your soul enough to sense Him, not just hear Him. There are things God cannot tell you when your heart is busy. There are answers He cannot give you when your mind is racing. There are instructions He cannot release while you're fighting battles with your own strength. Silence becomes the place where your surrender becomes deep enough for His guidance to flow. In silence, your defenses drop, your pride softens, your need for control loosens. You become teachable, you become open, you become receptive. Silence creates the space God needs to pour clarity into you. Sometimes the reason God is not giving you new direction is because He's waiting for you to be still long enough to receive the direction He already released. Your spirit must quiet down to recognize His voice. You cannot hear His tender guidance while you are arguing with your worries. You cannot sense His leading while you are debating with your fears. Silence restores your sensitivity to His presence. It resets your spiritual hearing. It wipes away the static that life imposes on your soul. Many people pray, "Lord, speak to me," but then rush back into their chaos without pausing, without waiting, without listening. Prayer is not just speaking to God. Prayer is also becoming silent before Him. When you say nothing, it is not emptiness, it is an invitation. Silence tells God, "I trust you enough to stop trying to fix everything on my own. I trust you enough to listen." Silence says, "I am ready to hear what you have been trying to tell me." There are miracles that begin in silence because silence is where faith is strengthened. When you stop talking, you give God room to move. When you stop worrying, you give God room to speak. When you stop over-explaining yourself to people who will never understand you, you open the door for God to reveal His understanding. Silence becomes a doorway to revelation because your spirit becomes free from the noise that distracts you. God often reveals hidden things only in silence. He shows you what's behind the scenes. He exposes motives. He uncovers traps. He gives you insight into your next season. He strengthens your ability to discern what is of Him and what is not. You begin to see through spiritual eyes, not emotional eyes. You begin to sense things before they happen. Silence sharpens your discernment. In silence, God also heals the heart. He touches wounds that noise keeps you from noticing. He brings up emotions that you suppress when you stay busy. He settles the storms inside you that you pretend are calm. Silence is not just spiritual, it's emotional and mental healing. God speaks to the heart that is quiet because a quiet heart is a surrendered heart. And in that silence, God begins to impress things upon you. He puts desires in your spirit. He shifts your direction without using words. He nudges you, aligns you, strengthens you, corrects you. Some of the most powerful messages God gives are not spoken, they are felt. They come as peace where there was confusion. They come as stillness where there was panic. They come as confidence where there was fear. These are His silent words speaking louder than any audible voice. When you allow silence to become part of your walk with God, you will begin to notice something remarkable. You start recognizing His voice in places you overlooked before. You hear Him in your spirit while washing dishes. You sense Him in the middle of your workday. You feel His guiding hand while driving. Your spiritual ears stay open because silence becomes a posture, not just a moment. In silence, God trains your hearing. And when God trains your hearing, miracles follow. When God invites you into silence, He is not inviting you into emptiness. He is inviting you into partnership with His supernatural hand. There are seasons when the greatest thing you will ever do is remain still while God works in realms you cannot see, fights battles you don't know about, and arranges breakthroughs that have not yet reached the earth. Silence is not weakness. Silence is positioning. Silence is not passivity. Silence is spiritual intelligence. It is the act of stepping aside so that God can step fully into the situation. And when God steps in, miracles begin to unfold without noise, without announcement, without permission from anyone who doubted you. There are times when God will tell you, say nothing right now, because the miracle He is preparing requires divine timing. If you speak too soon, you may alert the enemy. If you speak too early, you may invite unnecessary opposition. If you share too quickly, you may expose the seed before it has roots. Silence is God's way of protecting the promise until it is strong enough to be revealed. Many people lose miracles not because they lack faith, but because they talk too much during the building stage. Sometimes God hides the miracle to protect it and hides you to preserve you. When you keep silent, you stop feeding the situation with human emotion. You stop feeding your fear. You stop fueling your anxiety. You stop giving power to voices that never cared about your breakthrough. Silence shuts doors that distraction tries to open. Silence removes your fingerprints from the miracle so that when the testimony comes, only God can get the glory. The less you talk, the more space God has to move. The more you surrender your urge to defend yourself, the more God rises as your defender. The more you refuse to panic, the more God reveals his peace. Heaven speaks loudest when your heart is quietest. Some of the greatest miracles in Scripture were not born in declarations, but in stillness. When Israel stood before the Red Sea, trapped between a wall of water and an army of soldiers, God didn't say, "Fight," or "Run," or "Explain your strategy." He said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." In other words, be quiet and watch what I will do. When Joshua and his people marched around the walls of Jericho, God told them to walk in silence for 6 days. No shouting, no chanting, no arguing, no explaining, just walking silently. Why? Because the miracle was spiritual, not logical. It wasn't their voices that would bring the walls down. It was their obedience. It wasn't noise that would create breakthrough. It was surrender. And on the 7th day, when God released them to shout, the walls didn't fall because of their sound. They fell because of their silence that came before it. Your miracle may be the same. God may be leading you into a season where your silence is actually warfare. Silence is not inactivity, it is strategic victory. You may not realize it, but your silence confuses the enemy. He expects you to panic. He expects you to break down. He expects you to argue, defend yourself, or prove your worth. But when you stay silent, you signal to heaven that you trust God to fight the battle. And every time you choose silence, heaven moves a little more. Every time you restrain your tongue, angels move a little faster. Every time you choose peace over panic, God accelerates the miracle behind the scenes. Your silence becomes a weapon that disarms darkness. It removes spiritual clutter. It shuts the mouth of accusation. It closes the door to gossip. It tells the enemy, "You will not provoke me. You will not steal my peace. You will not lure me into battles that belong to God." Silence is the language of confidence. It is the posture of spiritual maturity. It is the sign that you are no longer living from your emotions, but from your spirit. When God is orchestrating something major in your life, He often brings you into a quiet place to protect the process. He will silence your circle, narrow your environment, and reduce the noise around you. Not because He wants to isolate you, but because He wants to elevate you. He will let certain people exit without explanation. He will allow some conversations to die naturally. He will remove you from rooms where your destiny could be contaminated. Silence becomes the holy ground upon which your miracle is built. In silence, God downloads clarity you could not hear before. He speaks direction your busy mind once blocked. He plants ideas your anxiety once smothered. He strengthens your faith in ways that noise could never accomplish. Miracles grow in quiet soil. Breakthrough blossoms in stillness. Destiny blooms in the hush of surrendered moments. And while you remain silent, God begins to speak through signs, through confirmations, through unexpected open doors, through favor that seems unreasonable, through blessings that make no sense, through protection that you didn't even know you needed. He speaks through circumstances aligning perfectly. He speaks through opportunities that come without striving. He speaks through peace that settles over you like a blanket when you would normally be trembling. Silence opens your spiritual ears to a God who is always talking, but only heard by those who stop long enough to listen. So when God calls you into silence, don't resist it. Don't fear it. Don't misinterpret it. It is not punishment. It is preparation. It is not abandonment. It is alignment. It is not emptiness. It is overflow waiting to manifest. God is not muted. He is magnifying his next move. And when he finally releases the miracle, it will be clear to everyone that it wasn't your effort, your words, your planning, or your intelligence that made it happen. It was God speaking through the silence, working through the stillness, and answering through a miracle no one could explain. In every moment of silence, God is at work. He speaks in ways that words cannot capture, moves in ways that eyes cannot see, and releases miracles in ways that hearts cannot imagine. Staying silent does not mean inaction. It means trust, surrender, and a willingness to let God's power manifest without interference. Every time you pause, wait, and quiet your soul, you create a space for divine intervention. What seems delayed or absent is already being orchestrated in the unseen. Remember, God does not need your voice to prove his presence. Your faith, your quiet trust, and your patience are the instruments through which heaven responds. Miracles are often birthed in the stillness, in the moments when human effort ceases and divine action begins. The more you let go of the need to control, to demand, or to explain, the more room God has to move in your favor. So continue to stay silent in prayer, persistent in faith, and unwavering in hope. Let the quietness of your heart be the stage upon which God displays his glory. Your miracles are not dependent on your timing. They are dependent on God's perfect timing. And in his perfect timing, what you have prayed for, what you have longed for, and what you have hoped for will arrive, surpassing every expectation and testifying to the greatness of the one who never fails.